Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. This seems to be a time for recording that seems to be working out for me right now, as long as I, plan a short enough video or have have my breakfast pretty quickly. But anyway, for this video, I want to do a quick review of a book that I read. I want to say I read it a couple months back. It's called Quick Curtain. It's by Alan Melville, and it's a British library crime classic. So, this was an enjoyable read, but as a mystery, I wouldn't necessarily call it top-notch. Now, I will, excuse me, I will warn you that there might be some spoilers in here unintentionally. I'll try not to spoil the book too much for you, but if you are worried about that sort of thing, you are forewarned. Like I said, I'll try to avoid too much in the way of spoilers, but that's always going to be the risk you run when you're watching a book review. So I think that the book is best epitomized by the way it is described by Dorothy L. Sayers in the introduction. She did a literary review of it back in the day when it was written, because this was actually written originally in 1934. So here's the quote from Dorothy L. Sayers. Reviewing this novel for the Sunday Times, the eminent crime writer Dorothy L. Sayers noted that Melville gets great enjoyment out of scarifying all the leading lights of the profession, from producer to dramatic critic. Now here's the part I was more interested in. She was troubled that Melville blows the solemn structure of the detective novel sky high. And it goes on to say, outside the quote, but his aim was to have fun with the genre. And then going on to Sayers took reviewing seriously, and she chose to assess this book in the context of an analysis of the way different crime writers treated police procedure. And this was something that bothered me as well. This may explain her reservations about a detective story that she regarded as a leg pull. This happy policeman never turns in a report, acknowledges no official superiors, bounces into country police stations and bullies the constables without reference to local authorities, and does all his detecting from his private house with the sole aid of his journalist son. Light entertainment is Mr. Melville's aim, and a fake for procedure. And this is this last quote that I just read, that little paragraph, is starting from leg pull and a fake for procedure. That is this book in a nutshell. It's really, you get the feeling that Melville is enjoying more the interaction between father and son, kind of this quick repartee back and forth between the two of them, than in actually crafting a coherent murder mystery. And to be fair, his narrative voice is amusing. You spend like the first, 13, 14 pages before you actually have a character speak. But the narrative voice is so amusing that you aren't really bothered by it. But so, and his characters, like the way that the father rags on his son for using what he considers like American slang, because he considered okay, for example, to be American slang. And actually, okay, if you must really give way to these vulgar Americanisms, but not oak instead of okay. Or he has something where he says, okay, as you would say in your disgusting slanguage. So, I mean, there's definitely a strong use of humor within this book, but to put a point, particularly on what she's talking about police procedure. Even before, I didn't read her introduction till afterwards, as per usual with classics, because I find a lot of times they kind of spoil things going in. And I'd rather go in with a fresh mind, and then I'll read the introduction after the fact. So that's what I did in this book. And so when I read Dorothy L. Sayers' opinion, I was like, yes, that is exactly what I felt, because there were points where he and his son would decide who would go where based off of a flip of a coin, but it was something like, you're the detective in charge of the case. That's not how this works. You don't get to decide, do I get to go to the funeral of the person who died, or do I get to go to the inquest? I'm sorry, you go to the inquest regardless. That's your job. Going to the funeral is kind of like I want to do that, but excuse me. Most of the time, from what I understand, if there's going to be a murder case, the detective has to go. It's not like I kind of want to. He has to go. That is not a choice. He might even be speaking at said inquest. So it was just like, it really was like throw any procedure to the wind. The father actually didn't even go to the inquest. The son went because that's how the coin toss worked. And it was just really odd. He felt very unprofessional as a detective, which in and of itself is not necessarily a sorry, let me take a drink of water. Which in and of itself is not necessarily something that will sink a mystery novel. You can have a police detective that is lax on procedure, as long as it is shown that he's keeping within the basic parameters of his job. You can have someone who is just doesn't give the impression of being a police detective, or who just doesn't seem to fit. I mean, I think that this actually came up in the death of Mr. Dodsley. They mentioned multiple times, oh, that was a private detective, so never mind. But it's not like outside the realm of possibility to have a good detective novel with someone who might seem like, oh, he doesn't fit the role. But he has to follow basic police procedure, because there's no way he'd be able to keep his job otherwise. And it doesn't make sense for a police detective to go to the funeral of the deceased instead of the inquest. His son, who's a journalist, doesn't get to barter that with him. That's not how it works. So there's things like that were just kind of like, really? And the fact that he made no real use of his police department. It was just, you have to suspend a lot of disbelief for this mystery novel, more so than usual, because there is always going to be, I think, a certain extent of suspendal, that's not a word, suspending of disbelief. We need to make suspendal a word. Anyway, you had to suspend, in general, a level of disbelief when you're dealing with some of the Golden Age mysteries, particularly some of the convoluted ways that, they might be, the murders might be committed or whatever. So I understand that. These are not like going to be a one-to-one with reality, but you have to at least have your police detective follow basic procedure. That being said, I did enjoy the narrative voice. I did enjoy the interactions between father and son. I'm just not sure that Melville really needed to be writing a murder mystery. I think that maybe he needed to be writing some sort of family hijinks comedy sort of thing instead, because that seemed to be where his heart was more at. It almost felt kind of slapsticky at times, although not quite to that extreme. He was so focused on the humor between father and son and the interactions and the humor of the situations that he would create, that when you thought that a good mystery was actually building up, that there was like, oh, there's red herrings and this and that, and you're like, okay, great, there might actually be a real like mystery here that we can sink our teeth into. He then, I think for the sheer amusement of turning things on its head to make fun of his characters, he just completely flips the script and subverts everyone's expectations. And like I said, I think he does it for the comedic value, but in the context of the story, it makes no sense. It's not well set up. It leaves a bunch of loose ends. It leaves a bunch of loose ends, and it doesn't really work, which is unfortunate. Like I said, you have to read this book not with the idea that you are going to be reading a well-crafted detective novel. You need to read this book with the idea that it's a farce. It's more about maybe almost not quite Punch and Judy, but like kind of it's a light mockery of, I guess, kind of like mockery of the Golden Age mystery in general. Now, there was a couple things I found interesting, especially considering the time period, because this is the early 1930s when this is written, but yet there were a couple references to Nazism, but in a way that I thought was interesting, almost like, okay, so instead of saying something like, oh, if XYZ would only happen if pigs could fly, or if XYZ happens, then, you know, I'm a tortoise, or I don't know, like, or something weird like that. Like, if XYZ happens, I'm some ridiculous thing. Well, they would say like, if XYZ is this, then I'm a Nazi. And it's just like, whoa, what? It's just like, where did that come from? And they use this a couple of times. It's just like, whoa, that's kind of weird. And for back then, that would have been, you know, before the US would have joined. Oh, I guess this is British. Yeah. But you don't get the impression that it's during, I mean, this isn't during the height of World War II, because this is what I say, 1934. So I'm trying to find where an example of where they say, you know, if XYZ, then I'm, you know, a Nazi. Hold on one sec. It took a while, but I found an example. So, I see, said Derek, pointing to where the two halves of the curtain met in the center of the stage, a small round hole, and just a minute while I climb up. Yes, if that isn't a bullet hole, then I'm a Nazi. And this happens a couple times. And the first time they do that, it really caught me by surprise. It's like, whoa, that's weird. But yeah, so it's kind of an interesting little snapshot of, I would say it's a snapshot of the 1930s, early 1930s. I'm wondering if some of the way that, especially with the younger character talks, might be a representation of the journalistic class at that era, or at least of the author's experience with the journalistic class. But I believe, yeah, here we go. Melville, the author, was a well-known television broadcaster as well as a playwright, producer, and scriptwriter. So, among his works, there are several crime novels from the 1930s, often set in the popular entertainment world he knew at first hand. And as a satire on the theater world, this is quite fun. This is quite well done. You can tell that he has been steeped in this world and that he is mocking it to a certain extent. He's satirizing it to a certain extent. So for that, I think it does quite well. For its representation of, for its, not for its representation, for its actual function as a mystery novel, it's a little shaky. It's quite shaky as a mystery novel. But as satire of theatrical life and everything around the theater, I think that's probably quite top-notch. Satire of maybe some of the journalistic, the journalists surrounding that kind of world, that I'm sure was accurate, or at least a fun satirizing of that. But I think that everything regarding the detective father, you really have to suspend your disbelief quite a bit for him. But if you take it in the way that is written, see it mostly as a satire than as a legitimate golden age murder mystery, I think you'll get that much more enjoyment out of it that way. So would I recommend this book? If you're looking for a fun book, but not for like a really nice golden age mystery, as in like a really well-functioning golden age mystery that will keep you guessing. I mean, it keeps you guessing, but not because it's well written as a mystery. But one where if you're not looking for a golden age mystery where you get to the end of the mystery and you're like really satisfied with the conclusion, where you can kind of see how it built up. If you're not looking for that kind of mystery, I think you'll enjoy it. If you're looking for a satire, if you're looking for something that's funny. But if you are looking for a golden age mystery where when you get to the end, you're like, wow, I can see where they got there. I mean, they pulled the wool over my eyes, but I can see where the breadcrumbs were left. I can see where this makes sense. Oh, this is great. If you're looking for that, don't read this book. Will I keep this book? I probably will. I probably will. I know what to expect now. And I think I'll probably at least give it a read or two more before I decide whether or not I keep it, because the humor might, after a while, become a bit heavy-handed for me. But I'll make up my mind upon further reading. At this point, this isn't one I'm in a hurry to get rid of. But I am going to have to get going. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope that you have a very blessed day, and I will see you the next time. God bless. Bye.